Hello, I'm Francesca Maxime. Thanks so much for joining us here in New York City. You're watching Arise News Weekend, where you'll get deeper insight into stories making headlines all around the world. In this half hour, Boko Haram strikes again. Dozens are kidnapped from a village in Cameroon. Plus, tensions between Israel and Lebanon continue. An Israeli airstrike kills a member of the Lebanese Hezbollah movement. And Pope Francis, the musical? Yeah, stranger things have happened. We have those stories and much more straight ahead. Thanks so much for joining us. Our top story at this hour, yet another terror attack from the extremist group Boko Haram. Militants are suspected of kidnapping at least 80 people in Cameroon, a country at Nigeria's southern border. Many of those taken were children. It is believed that the girls are abducted to be used as sex slaves and possibly suicide bombers. Boys are being recruited to become child soldiers. Several were killed during the attack. The country of Chad is gearing up against Boko Haram. Troops from that nation are preparing to deploy to Cameroon to fight militant members. The country's president meeting with the troops this weekend before that deployment. And there could also be more help on the way to fight against Boko Haram. The president of Ghana says that next week he and other West African leaders will be seeking authority from the African Union to create a multinational force to fight that extremist group. And in Syria, an Israeli airstrike killed 5 members of Lebanon's Hezbollah movement. Included in those deaths was the son of the group's late military leader. It is feared that the attack would trigger reprisals. The tension between Israel and Lebanon has gone all the way to the Miss Universe pageant. Take a look at this picture. In this, you see a group photo of the beauty queens at pageant preparations in Miami. Starting at the left, you see Miss Israel. To her immediate right, you see Miss Lebanon. Now, Miss Lebanon says that she was taking a photo with 2 other queens, Miss Slovenia and Miss Japan, when Miss Israel jumped into the shot at the very last second. Now, some in Lebanon have demanded that their queen lose her title for having contact with Miss Israel. Looks like a regular selfie to me. All right, well, the conflict in Ukraine continues. The military says that government forces have reclaimed the Donetsk airport from rebels. Nathan Frandino has this update.
Ukrainian military forces are on the move in Donetsk. Racing through the countryside in Ukraine's brutal winter, the forces launch a military operation to retake the Donetsk airport. The military had lost territory around the airport to rebels in recent weeks. A military spokesman says the operation returns the battle lines to the previous status quo agreed to under a peace deal reached in September.
The decision was taken for a mass operation, which was successful. As you saw the information yesterday, we succeeded in almost completely cleaning the territory of the airport, which belongs to Ukrainian forces as marked by military separation lines.
As the operation continues, the death toll climbs. The military spokesman says 4 men were killed and 32 were wounded. He blames the separatists, accusing them of using heavy artillery.
The terrorists' attacks on Donetsk airport continue, which include the use of heavy artillery. In particular, yesterday, bandit groups were shooting multiple launch rocket systems right from residential areas.
The recent escalation has prompted concerns from Russian President Vladimir Putin. His spokesman says the violence is not conducive to resolving the conflict, which has killed more than 4,800 people.
Well, to Europe now, where Greece is lending its support to Belgium. Police from Greece will team up with Belgium on a joint investigation into the breakup of possible terror cells in the country. It is believed that several suspects from that plot are actually in Greece. Police there confirm that Belgium is requesting the extradition of one of those suspects. Belgian police busted the plot in raids on Thursday. 2 people were killed, 15 others were arrested. Well, in Yemen, the president's chief of staff has been kidnapped. Houthi rebels have claimed responsibility for it. They say it's over disagreements with the country's president on his proposed constitution. Well, still to come, a forward glance at President Obama's State of the Union address. You're watching Arise News Weekend.
The best way to predict the future is to create it. There's a special breed of achievers out there that are called tomorrow's people, the highly creative ones who live in the future. They imagine what will be and strive to make it happen. They're bold. They refuse to wait for the future. Tomorrow bends and conforms to their ideas. At Access Bank, we share the same sentiments. We've been able to grow our bank to become a leading player in Nigeria with a strong presence across the continent, adopting best practice in everything we do. Our mantra for success is simple: speed, service, and security. Those who shape tomorrow strive for and demand perfection. At Access Bank, our service culture of speedy response and drive for excellence is the blueprint for creating customer experiences that will echo for generations. Come, let's work together and take tomorrow.
Welcome back. You're watching Arise News Weekend. Well, members of Congress headed south this weekend. 6 Democratic members are in Cuba to help normalize relations between the country and the U.S. They'll be tackling such issues as open travel, use of American credit cards in Cuba, and use of the internet in Cuba by American travelers.
We've just seen a remarkable change in relations between our countries.
While the U.S. does continue regular talks with Cuba in the coming months, a new embassy is also planned to be built in Havana. On Tuesday, President Barack Obama will address the nation in his annual State of the Union address. Now, the president is now working with the Republican-controlled Congress, of course. Andre Richardson joins us now to discuss the president's future with this Congress. He's a political strategist and a principal with Paragon Strategies. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, what can we expect on Tuesday?
So I think we're going to see the president continue to play offense. I mean, he said this last week. He's got a lot of bold ideas that he just passed in the last year. And this year, he's going to start talking about saving families that are underwater in their mortgages, possibly extending free college tuition for 2 years to about 9 million students across the country, if all 50 states wind up participating. And then we'll see some protections for gays and lesbians in the workplace and some other fantastic things as well.
Well, what is the State of the Union when it comes to things like job growth and unemployment?
Well, I mean, if we look now, we can see the longest stretch in job creation, which was about 200 and I think 4,000 jobs created consistently for about 57 months. Unemployment is down to about 5.6%. And we're also seeing gas prices are almost at an all-time low. Gas is extremely cheap right now as well.
Well, we also know, as we mentioned in the introduction, that, you have 2 Republican-controlled houses of Congress. How is this going to affect whatever the president is going to do in the next couple of years?
So what will happen is this: typically, anytime there's a president from the opposite party of both the House and the Senate, in the lame duck term, you'll see a bunch of lofty promises that the president will lay out to the American people. And I think it's about 40% of which can actually be followed through with. So we'll see some more executive actions, but there's only so far he can go with his executive power, and he actually will need some unanimity from the Republican-controlled House. His
popularity rating is actually better than it had been. He sort of had a really good end to 2014. So is that going to help him with the State of the Union and people's reception to him, and how's that going to play out?
Well, I think what we're seeing is we're seeing a president who got, kind of beat up a little bit in the midterms, his words, not mine. And we'll see some more bold actions. He's no longer going to be on defense. We're going to see some exciting things happening for immigration. We're seeing communications being back opened up with Cuba, and everything's kind of being teed up for the 2016 presidential election.
We'll see who runs. We also know that he just announced yesterday a middle-class tax cut and some increased taxes for the wealthy. How's that going to play out come Tuesday?
Well, I mean, I'm excited. He's talking about taxing about 99% of the 1%. So the average person is not going to feel it. But we're talking about $320 billion saved over 10 years. And even if you see on the Republican side, everybody's kind of, well, mostly the Republicans are trying to come closer to the center. They're even talking about middle-class tax cuts, not taxing the rich. But what we'll see is this. We'll see about a 28% tax increase on capital gains and the estate tax, which is actually the exact same figure it was during Ronald Reagan's tenure.
Do you think think the president is really a good orator? Is this a good forum for him, or does he do better in smaller, sort of more, intimate settings?
Well, I mean, I would say that, his swag is his highest when he's campaigning, right? So there's, he's a political animal in that regard, and the only person that comes close or even made exceeded is Bill Clinton. But he also is, like you said, a great orator, and he definitely wants to address the nation as a whole and lay out these plans and preserve his legacy at the same time.
All right. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thanks so much for joining us,
Thanks
Andre.
for having
Looking
me.
forward to the State of the Union come Tuesday.
Likewise.
When we come back, a look at the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. You're watching Arise News Weekend.
I believe that people are watching news less today, definitely. I think that more so people are going online to catch their news.
We've numbed the human mind to murders and all these bad things. The content is a constant loop of the same stuff. So there needs to be, new content all the time.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Well, continuing his tour of the Philippines, Pope Francis celebrated Mass in the capital city of Manila with millions of Filipinos. Nathan Frandino has more.
6 to 7 million people. That's how many of the faithful braved the rain in Manila for Pope Francis, the Vatican says. The number is the largest ever for a papal event. Many waited overnight and then an additional 9 more hours for the open-air Mass to start. As Pope Francis arrived on board his Pope-mobile, many danced and sang while holding figurines to honor the child Jesus, known locally as Santo Niño.
So we ask for the grace of simplicity and humility. Because being a child is very simple. And also, being a child is humble.
With bells and a choir welcoming his arrival, Pope Francis circled the stage before appealing to the crowd to learn how to cry over the plight of the poor, hungry, homeless, and abused children.
We need to see each child as a gift to be welcomed, cherished, and protected. And we need to care for our young people, not allowing them to be robbed of hope and condemned to the life on the streets.
As the Mass ended and the crowds bid farewell to Pope Francis, worshippers tried expressing their joy.
I can't explain the feeling. My joy is overwhelming.
I am overwhelmed. I can feel the Lord's presence. It gives me strength, as if all my troubles were taken away.
The Vatican's last visit to Asia's only predominantly Catholic country was in 1995, when Pope John Paul drew some 5 million followers.
Well, from the Philippines back to here in the United States, Monday marks the observance of Martin Luther King Day. And in light of recent events, such as the protests about the non-indictments of 2 white police officers in the deaths of 2 unarmed black men, it's probably a good time to take a look at Dr. King's legacy. So I recently spoke with Dr. Timothy Patrick McCarthy, an award-winning scholar of the history of social movements, who teaches at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. What do you think, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., what would he say about the recent events and race relations in the United States today?
Well, I think if Dr. King were to come back to us today, he'd be of 2 minds. On the one hand, he would look at the unbelievable amount of progress that's been made, particularly for the black middle class. He would see a black president. He would see his good friend and comrade John Lewis in the U.S. Congress, and he would be thrilled at the amount of progress that's been made in the 50 or 60 years since the black freedom struggle. On the other hand, I think he would look at what's going on in the aftermath of Ferguson and Staten Island with with the ongoing battles over racism and white supremacy in the United States, of economic inequality, of police brutality. And I think he would be dismayed that we have not made much progress on those issues, and in fact, in recent years have gone backwards and are moving in the wrong direction.
Well, Tim, what do you think that the civil rights movement did right then, and what is or isn't being done today that is working in terms of advancing equality?
Well, I think one thing the civil rights movement did was it was relentless in its local organizing. I think one of the things that we think about when we look back at history is we think about this Black freedom struggle or this civil rights movement as a fully formed national movement that had global implications. But when in reality, the civil rights movement was, and always was, a series of local organizing battles on the ground in places like Albany, Georgia, and Birmingham, Alabama, and Montgomery, and Selma, and all of these different places where different battles for different kinds of rights against this sort of infrastructure of white supremacy and racist violence. That organizing that took place on the local level was always at the heart and soul of the movement itself. And so I think today, when we think about a national movement in the wake of Ferguson and Staten Island, the Black Lives Matter movement, I think that we will see similar kinds of local organizing strategies that are linked up to a national call for transformation.
Well, one of the things that is in theaters right now is Selma, the movie about Dr. King's legacy, and it's been nominated for an Oscar for Best Picture. Is this movie, do you think, a good tool or a way of educating the current population about King's legacy and history, and why or why not?
Well, there's no question that the film is a powerful film, and notwithstanding the recent snubs that it got for direction and acting at the Oscars, it is up for Best Picture. And this film has ignited, I think, a national debate, or reignited a national debate about some really important things. The first thing that the film depicts is a movement of the people. It is much more of a grassroots representation of the civil rights movement and the Black freedom struggle than it is a biopic specifically about the greatness of Martin Luther King, as great as he was. So this is a movement about the people and the grassroots strategies that brought about that great social change. There's also a debate going on that I think this film has helped to reignite, which is who is responsible for the great transformation and changes of the civil rights movement and the Black freedom struggle. There's a huge national debate right now about the representation of LBJ, of Lyndon Johnson, in the film. And this is a heated debate that has been going on since the civil rights movement, the relationship between King and LBJ, who was responsible for the changes that took place during the 1960s, and then ultimately who fueled the movement. Where did that energy come from? And that energy was always coming from and deriving principally from the people, and the film depicts that in a powerful and wonderful way.
Certainly a movie about a biopic. Last question, Tim, take me back to the civil rights movement. Remind us of what Dr. King was really fighting against, the kind of Jim Crow laws and forms of oppression that did exist that aren't here today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that he was struggling for Black freedom, not just for particular kinds of civil rights for Black people. And that meant dismantling white supremacy and segregation within institutions like schools, like voting rights, like public accommodations and businesses. But Martin Luther King's legacy is something bigger than that, even bigger than those really important things that he was fighting for and that the movement was fighting for. He was also fighting increasingly against economic inequality and economic divisions in the society. He was, late in his life, a very outspoken critic of the Vietnam War and of the escalating violence that came from war. And so this was a man and a movement as well, but in particular, Martin Luther King was someone who was fighting against all forms of inequalities for a broad-based and deeply held view of human rights for all people, trying to dismantle structures of segregation and of prejudice, but also trying to flatten out the kinds of inequalities that are still very much pervasive in American society.
All right, Dr. Timothy Patrick McCarthy, joining us from Sarasota, Florida. That's all we have time for, but thank you so much for talking to us about Dr. King and his legacy today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Well, still ahead, a conversation about the movie Selma and the lack of diversity in this year's Oscar nominations. You're watching Arise News Weekend.
I think media and reporters have a lot to answer for.
AIDS, hunger, people not having running water, the things that we just take for granted.
I think the most important issues in the world today are education and poverty.
Terrorism and war, I guess, is always. It's always an issue, and you know, the quality of life of certain groups of people in certain areas.
I think inequality.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Despite the fact that the movie Selma was nominated for Best Picture without nods for Best Director or Actor or Actress, it's been said that this year's Oscars snubbed African-American filmmakers. Film reviewer and veteran celebrity talk show host Bobby Rivers, a frequent contributor to our movie show Rise on Screen, joins us now with more. Welcome, Bobby.
How you doing?
How you doing?
How you doing?
All right, so the Oscars being so whitewashed, what's up with that?
What's up? This year, the nominees, that whole list, look, whiter than Christmas with Rush Limbaugh. Not for real. And I think it's not just, we wouldn't be having this conversation if there had been some Latino and Asian actors in there, but it was just so glaring that there were no minorities in there.
Yeah, it was.
And especially because of the reviews that Ava DuVernay got for Selma. Ava and David Oyelowo as Martin Luther King, they got the kind of reviews that Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks got for Saving Private Ryan. So you just assume where all of these nationally renowned critics loved it, they were going to Hollywood prom night, AKA the Academy Awards.
But isn't part of the problem here potentially that it's been said that there were not as many screeners sent out of Selma, and of course the Academy as such votes on this, right? This isn't a popular vote.
You know, I have a problem with that because Lord knows, I've been reviewing movies since the Stone Age, and like back in the 80s and the early 90s, they didn't have screeners. You went to the movie, or you saw the movie. I'm gonna drop a name.
Okay.
Yeah. One time, Lucille Ball invited me to her house, and we were talking, and she liked the movie Working Girl. And I said, did you see it at the premiere? She went, I saw it in flight. She said, a lot of actors see a movie in flight, and that saves them some money.
Sure.
So the whole thing with the screeners, you know, I think, well, you know, they're kind of getting around the problem. The Academy needs to be more proactive. Actually embrace minorities into the fold.
I was going to say, but doing that means that you have to have more minorities in the actual Academy, and we know that the president is an African-American woman, but that's about it.
That's about it. I think 43 members on the Board of Governors, 6 women, 1 black person. She's the president. And the Academy just has to really do more recruiting. I think what they tend to do is sit down and wait for you to get the Oscar nomination so you could be invited in. The problem, I think, would be rectified if there were 50% female members of the Academy, because I think there have been Prince of Tides, Winter's Bone, The Kids Are All Right, Selma. 4 movies that were nominated for Best Picture. The women who directed them, not nominated for Best Director.
So it's not unique to this situation necessarily. You know, there's also the argument that, listen, we can't sell and market and distribute a black-themed film, an American black-themed film, internationally in the same way. So what do you say to that argument? It's not going to make money.
That really has to be fixed. That's an excuse. You know what? Look. Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger are still action heroes. They're beating up bad guys with their walkers. Now, the movies are sent overseas. Their movies can get overseas, but we can't get anything with Viola Davis.
Viagra generation.
Yeah, Viagra generation. You know, they're putting them in Pez dispensers. They're sold, but they're putting. You know, we can't get stuff shipped overseas. Like what was the movie with the fellow who was unfortunately shot in Oakland on the train? Octavia Spencer was in it. Fruitvale Station. I was going to come to it. Fruitvale Station, a wonderful film. They loved it at the Cannes Film Festival. Should have been nominated for Oscars last year. A movie like that should, you know, the foreign market gets our hip hop and rap music. Why isn't the foreign market getting our movies?
All right, just really quickly, you mentioned also that you need representation sometimes. Right. Agents?
Agents. Look, I have been, for most of I have over 10 years of network credits to my resume. I haven't had an agent in years. You know, I've done network, I've done some acting, I was in Sopranos a couple of times. I will go into a New York City agent's office and he'll say, I don't know what to do with you. But Honey Boo Boo had a show. So what's up with that? We need more minority agents, broadcast agents, theatrical agents, yes, and that will help the people of color get green lights for their projects or be considered for
helping
good parts.
To push it along. Bobby Rivers, gonna have to leave it there.
All right.
Come back anytime and hang with us over here.
Thank you for the invite. Okay.
I like these kind of conversations. All right, from motion pictures to the stage, when we return, a look at Pope Francis, the musical. Yeah.
Pope Francis? I want to be the first black pope. Pope Chop.
Okay, we'll be working on that.
All right.
You're watching Arise News Weekend.
If I was building my own news network, I think I'd want broad, in-depth knowledge of important issues throughout the world.
I would want to recruit a fairly diverse staff that had different life experiences before they came to the news.
We want to see how we can help ourselves and help benefit other people, not just see what's up with the celebrities and where they're going and traveling and buying this and buying that.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
If I was building my own network, it would be for the people, by the people. It would be very diverse. It would be with every culture you can think of.
If I was to start my own news network, it would reflect positive and negative within the continents and the countries around the world.
I think that I would be more looking towards young people.
If I were to build my own news network, it would look like New York City. Old, young, fresh, hip, classic.
If I was to build my own news network, I would just have people from all over who are very connected and diverse.
If I was to build my own news network, my own world network, I would love a correspondent in every country, every location, every city. I mean, it's kind of unrealistic, but how cool would it be to get local stories from the impoverished country, the impoverished city that we don't know about?
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Arise News is a different kind of network. We are able to tell our own stories, and we're able to cover stories in a way that other media outlets don't do. We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well. Arise News is a place where we can tell stories in an interesting, factual, inclusive way like no one else in the business can.
Well, they were called a modern-day Bonnie and Clyde. Now they are in jail. Two teens from Kentucky who were on the run for 2 weeks for car and gun thefts were arrested this morning in Panama City, Florida. Police say they were taken into custody without incident. In Delaware, shots were fired near the home of Vice President Joe Biden. Biden and his wife were not there at the time. The Secret Service says the shots were fired from a passing car, which quickly drove away. So far, nobody's been caught. In Colorado, jury selection begins Tuesday for the trial of James Holmes. The 27-year-old is accused of walking into a movie theater in 2012 and shooting 12 people to death. Prosecutors say they will seek the death penalty if he is convicted. Well, while Pope Francis has blessed millions during his trip to the Philippines, Filipinos themselves blessed the Pope with a musical of his life. Gavino Garay explains.
Get your holy garb on and take a trip through the eyes of His Holiness Pope Francis in the musical, Filipino style. This theater troupe wrote some 24 original songs to the tune of Francis's youth and rise to papacy and his most recent visit to typhoon-stricken Tacloban City. Hundreds of bishops from throughout Asia filled the audience. The man who played Francis describes the meaning behind the musical.
I think as what the theme of his visit to the Philippines is being very merciful and compassionate, because it is through this, shall we say, character of Pope Francis, we truly experience a God who is alive, a God who is present, a God who never sleeps.
One bishop from India enjoyed the musical number.
It gives the message that Pope Francis is a pope for the people and from among the people. He knows the people. He is a good shepherd.
Proceeds from the holy reenactment go to charity.
And of course, you see the Pope there wearing his rain gear. That, of course, because it was, in fact, raining, and he had to leave a little bit early because of inclement weather. Thanks so much for joining us on this edition of Arise News Weekend. I'm Francesca Maxime. You can always tweet me and find me on Instagram at Francesca Maxime. We'll see you next time.